Well, the title of this presentation today is Taiwan Undone. I changed it from, I think it said Taiwan Undone, the Poster, something, a report from the Barricades or something like that. But Taiwan Undone, an analysis of the 2004 elections and referendum. And because I have some images I want to show you, I prepared a simple PowerPoint presentation. But there's no bells and whistles, so we'll see how it works. What I want to cover is, first of all, I want to go over some numbers. Polling data, voter turnout, margin of victory, and some of the issues, because a lot of the controversy hinges on that particular problem. And then I want to talk about how the two parties, what we call the Pan Blue, which is the old Kuomintang, and the Qingmintang, the People First Party, which now have made a coalition called Pan Blue, how they framed the issues before the Taiwan electorate, and then how the DPP, the Democratic Progressive Party, how they framed the issues, and how those campaign issues were promoted. And then go on and show you. I scanned in some various campaign images, some posters and things that they use, so you can get a sense of how they go about campaigning in Taiwan. And then, of course, I'll talk a little bit about the protests that resulted from the razor-thin difference between the victors and the losers, and then talk about some implications for U.S. China-Taiwan relations. So let's see if this works. There we go. In Taiwan, there's 16.5 million registered voters. In Taiwan, when someone reaches 20 years old, they're automatically registered to vote. And the turnout for this past election was 80.2%. That's down 2% from 2000, but 80.2% turnout is phenomenal. In the United States, what do we get, like, what is it, 10, 20% turnout, something like that? Nevertheless, 12.9 voters cast ballots. That's 80.2% turnout. Now, this is an important statistic. 337,000 plus votes were invalidated, were spoiled ballots. That's 2.6% of the total votes cast. And the margin of victory was only 29,518 votes, 0.2%, 0.22%. Some people say it's 0.228%, which is an auspicious number in Taiwan, which resulted in a DPP victory gaining 50.11% of the vote, and the Pan Blue only gaining 49.8% of the vote. Now, therefore, it's a razor thin difference, which is significant, because in most countries, when you have such a razor thin majority, there's an automatic recount. But Taiwan is a young democracy, just maturing. They haven't got a lot of sophisticated laws dealing with unimaginable and unintended consequences of democracy. And there was no law on recount. Many countries have a law that mandates recount if it's less than 2% or 1% difference. But there was no law on recount, so that presented some problems that they're working through now. Now, I also got the 2000 elections up here. In 2000, the DPP was running its candidate, Chen Shui-bian, and he was elected with 39.3% of the vote in 2000. That's a plurality of the vote, but it's not a majority. The KMT, led by Lian Zhan at that time, the chairman of the KMT, received 23.1% of the vote, and the PFP, led by Song Chu-yu, James Song is his English name, he got 36.84%. So they had this idea that 2 plus 2, that 1 plus 1 equals 2, and 2 can beat 1. So they formed a coalition this time, which we refer to as the Pan Blue Coalition. But as you can see from the results, that despite the fact that they formed this Pan Blue Coalition, the DPP nevertheless increased its votes by over 10%, where it only gained less than 40% of the votes in 2000. This time around, it gained over 50% of the votes. So it increased its votes by 10% of votes cast, which, in terms of voting behavior, is a significant increase in support. But that still means that the KMT, Pan Blue, declined by about 10%, which means they barely lost taking power back from the DPP, because the DPP was the opposition party and was elected into power in 2000, but with a minority of support, only 39.3%. So when you look at this data, you can begin to see why there are problems and why the elections became so controversial. And I'll come back to this issue when we talk about the protests. But that kind of gives you the basic data that we're looking at. I might add that the DPP increased its, so how do you calculate DPP victory, or is it really a victory? Do they have any kind of mandate? In addition to increasing their overall votes by 10% over the last 4 years, if I remember correctly, in 10 counties they went from losing that county in terms of votes to winning that county, and in 20 counties they actually increased their number of votes. So as people look at this overall, they see the DPP is doing much better, but you wouldn't know that listening to the protests of the old KMT. The KMT tried to frame the issues. They want to frame the issues based upon poor economic performance in Taiwan, government incompetence, and cross-straits tension. Taiwan's economy has not been doing as well. Foreign direct investment is down and things like that. Government incompetence refers to when Chen Shui-bian was elected, he was elected on an anti-nuclear platform. There was a nuclear power plant that was about 3/4 finished, and he just simply shut down construction. So it cost billions of dollars in government financing just to shut it down, and to ever go back and rebuild that now would also be billions of dollars. And that caused really a crisis in the government. The fact that the president could just shut it down. The legislature tried to impeach him, but they backed away from that because they didn't want to really create a crisis. But it's those kinds of things that they considered incompetent. And then Chen Shui-bian, because of his pro-independence position in both actions and in rhetoric, angers the Beijing government, the PRC government, and they have, of course, always been threatening that they would attack Taiwan if Taiwan ever declared independence. Chen Shui-bian, being kind of the sly guy he is, I mean, he's a very good politician. He says, well, we don't have to declare independence because we already are independent. So Beijing, so they don't know where the red line is, because Beijing says, well, if you declare independence, we'll attack. He says, well, we're not going to declare independence. We are independent. Well, that's not a declaration of independence, so PRC can't attack. So there's this red line that we don't know when people will cross it and when they won't. And I'll come back to that when we talk about the dilemma that we face. Here's a poster the typical pan blue poster. It says at the top, it says, 拼经济, 拼经济, 拼和平, 拼Taiwan, 救 Taiwan. Means we'll struggle to improve the economy, we'll struggle to create peace or to make more peace, and we will save Taiwan, as if Taiwan's on the brink of disaster. Over there it says, together we will work together, we will make change, and then Taiwan will have a hope. So they're arguing, their campaign was framed that we'll improve the economy. We're a competent government. We've been in power for a long time, and we brought about the Taiwan miracle. We're running on our record of the Taiwan miracle, and we'll bring peace in the cross straits. Now the KMT, or rather the DPP, framed things differently. They said the issue is not the economy, incompetent government. The issue is Taiwan identity. Who are we? Is this country an independent country? Is this country simply a province of mainland China? Is it a renegade province? What is the future of Taiwan? Is the future of Taiwan the status quo? Are we going to continue to be de facto independent from mainland China, or are we going to be gobbled up by mainland China? Now, the DPP, it became common parlance to say that the KMT was trying to appeal to people's minds. Pocketbook issues. Are you better off today economically than you were before? Is the government run better than it was before? These are rational issues that we think about. We can look at our checkbooks, we can look at our paychecks, we can look at unemployment. We know what that is. We know whether we're better off or not. And so they thought they could run an effective campaign based upon that, on those mind issues, those rational issues. But the DPP switched the agenda and reframed it as an issue over your heart. Where is your heart? Is your heart with Taiwan? Is your heart for Taiwan. And so they began to create people to think in terms of what is my identity? What does it mean to be Taiwanese? And what is Taiwan in the world today? And their common campaign slogan is Yes Taiwan. Yes for Taiwan. 相信 Taiwan. Believe in Taiwan. 坚持改革. Support reform. And the DPP was advocating that by 2006 they will reform the Constitution. They will rewrite the Constitution. Because this is an old Constitution that was written in 1947 by the Nationalist Party when they still governed all of China. And it's an old, archaic kind of Constitution. And the KMT says, well, we just can keep amending it. And the DPP says, no, we need a new Constitution. That's called this old historical baggage that makes no sense in Taiwan. So they said they would rewrite the Constitution in 2006, have a referendum on the Constitution, and implement it in 2008. An important year because that's the year of the Beijing Olympics. And they figure they have some kind of insurance that, And they've argued that they wouldn't change the name of the country, they wouldn't change the flag, but they want to reduce the size of the legislature. They want to reorganize the government around a more rational system. The system that is in place now is something that was dreamed up by Sun Yat-sen back in 1911. So yes, Taiwan. Here's some national identity data that will help you. These are surveys that were taken in November of 2003, leading up to the elections, so just a few months ago. Of all those, and for those of you who are data mongers, it's about the statistical the sample size ranges between 1,000 and 1,200, and we're talking about a population of 23 million. So it's I don't know what the margin of error is, but it's legitimate. It's statistically legitimate surveys done by very good people. Of those surveyed, only 7.5% of them say, I am Chinese. I am only Chinese. And the question is, 你是不是中国人? Are you a Chinese? The second question is, are you both Chinese and Taiwanese? And 42.7% of the people say, I feel Chinese, but I'm also Taiwanese. And 39.9% say, I'm only Taiwanese. I am not Chinese. I may have a Chinese heritage, just like Americans have a European heritage, but an American would never say, well, I'm really European, but I think maybe I'm both American and European. We say, I'm an American, because we have developed an American identity, and that's what's going on in Taiwan today. They're developing a distinct identity as a Taiwanese, but recognizing that they have roots in China, and they have a Chinese heritage, much like Americans recognize their European heritage, but see themselves as Americans. Now, that's important data. Now, here, disaggregated is some other things. Those aged 20 to 23, 42% of them thought they were Taiwanese. So the younger people feel more Taiwanese than the population as a whole. 50.9% say they feel like they have both Chinese and Taiwanese identification, national identity, but only 2.9% feel they're Chinese. Now, that is an important statistic because in the total Taiwan population, about 10% of the population are people who came from the mainland in 1949 and are generally referred to as the Chinese. And the people who came hundreds of years ago were referred to as the Taiwanese. So we say Wai Shengren and Ben Shengren. So despite the overall population, about 10% of these people are either came from the mainland or are children from the mainland. Still, only 2.9% of them say I don't feel Chinese anymore. Only 2.9% say still feel Chinese. The vast majority say I feel Taiwanese or both Taiwanese and Chinese. Now, some people think, well, if those people who go to China and see China will develop a new identity of a more Chinese identity. But they actually did surveys on this too. And for those people who have lived in the mainland China, these are Taiwanese nationals who have lived in mainland China doing business, and there's about 500,000 of them there now. Those people who return, 13.7% favor unification, 55.1% favor the status quo, which is neither independence nor reunification, and 23% favor independence. Those without mainland experience, 9.8% favor unification, 53.3% favor status quo, and 21.6% favor independence. So you can see the interesting statistic here is that those with mainland experience actually feel less inclined to support reunification and independence. So the idea that living in China or having economic relationships with China will somehow create in Taiwanese a greater China identity is really not borne out by the statistics. Some people say this is analogous to Europe. even though Europe has become European Union and there's a lot of economic unification, French still feel French, British feel British, Spanish feel Spanish. They don't say, I'm European now. Well, despite the fact that Taiwanese are trading an enormous amount with mainland, traveling back and forth, that doesn't increase their feeling of Chineseness. It actually maybe even decreases their feeling of Chineseness. So that's important data on national identity issues and the evolving national identity. So the question becomes then, what are your attitudes about, how do you feel about being Taiwanese? What are your attitudes about unification with mainland China? What are your attitudes about independence? What are your attitudes about what we call the one country, two system form? This is the proposal by Beijing that Taiwan can still be Taiwan with its own economy and local government things, but it still should be part of mainland China, much like Hong Kong is part of mainland China, but governed separately. That's what we call the one country, two systems issue. And then there's something called the three links, which means whether there should be direct communication between Taiwan and mainland China, direct transfer of people, direct travel between Taiwan and mainland China, and direct shipping. Communication really means mail because there's phone call. You can phone now. But those are what we call the three links: shipping, communication, and transportation. Let me show you some data on that. Let's see how clear this is because maybe it's not going to show up. If it's not going to show up, we'll go on to the next one. Well, that's so much for technology. Let's go to the next one and see what that is. Okay, that one shows up. This is the same graph as the previous one. The previous one was a line graph. This is an area graph. You can see the questions asked. There's those who don't know. Do you favor independence as soon as possible, reunification as soon as possible, the status quo with a decision in the future, the status quo with eventual reunification, the status quo with eventual independence? And if you add up the numbers, about 70% of Taiwanese like the status quo. They want the status quo now and maybe some change in the future, with some favoring independence, some favoring the continuing of the status quo, and some favoring reunification. But a small number of people, that little red line, want unification as soon as possible, and a little bit larger group want independence as soon as possible. But the vast majority we're talking about the vast majority here who want the status quo. How about one country, two systems? Is this the formula for solving the Taiwan mainland China problem? As you can see, in November of last year, 71.4% said the one country, two system is not applicable for solving the Taiwan question. A very small percentage, 7.4%, thought that would solve the problem. But the vast majority of Taiwanese reject the one country, two systems formula. They think it's totally inappropriate for Taiwan because Taiwan has been independent from mainland China for over 100 years. It was beginning in 1895 under period of Japanese colonialism, and then after the war from 1949 to the present. How about three links? 75% roughly. They should conditionally open up direct transportation links. Only 7.8% think they should quickly open up these transportation links. Now, the KMT campaign slogan was, in order to improve Taiwan's economy and compete in the global economy, we need to immediately open up the three links with mainland China. Free shipping, free travel, free communication across the Taiwan Straits with no restrictions. The DPP took a cautious approach. They said there must be conditions here because we're concerned that it would suck jobs out of Taiwan, and economic concerns like sucking jobs out of Taiwan, and other kind of related issues. They don't want to become too dependent upon mainland China. They might blackmail us or manipulate us, something like that. But mainland China is Taiwan's largest trading partner, so they're already in a difficult position. Now, the DPP then used this national identity issue to attack the KMT. Whenever the KMT would say anything positive about mainland China, like we should aggressively pursue open relations or the three links, the DPP would respond by saying, you're going to sell out Taiwan. You're betraying Taiwan. You're going to sell it out to the communists. If they said anything like, well, you know, Taiwan eventually reunification is an option. We would negotiate, but it's an option. It's a possible outcome. They would say, you're a traitor to Taiwan. You love the communists. They really began attacking him about these kinds of things. You're selling Taiwan out. You're a traitor to Taiwan. You love the communists. And the KMT, the group I met, complained bitterly about this. They said, oh, it's worse than McCarthyism in the United States. They're attacking us of being pro-communist and being traitors and stuff. And I just kind of chuckled. I said, you know, I lived here under martial law, and if anybody said anything remotely positive about the communists, you simply put them in jail. And now you're complaining of being called pro-communist. It's really funny to see the shoe on the other foot now. But the DPP are not putting you guys in jail, are they? They're not shooting you. This is a DPP poster. You know, Shang Qianjin, let's go forward. Yes, Taiwan. Believe in Taiwan. Support the revision of the Constitution. Shang Ho Tui, go in reverse, back up, go the other way. They're accusing the KMT of no to Taiwan. And then it says, Chang Shui Taiwan, sort of sing the blues of Taiwan, sort of talk down Taiwan. Fan Dui Gaiga, and oppose reform, oppose the constitutional reform. And this is the way the DPP was effectively able to present the KMT as reactionary, anti-Taiwan, pro-mainland China, and this ended up being a very, very effective campaign strategy because it appealed to people's hearts and their feelings, and the economic issues, the rational mind issues were put way in the background, and the KMT felt, was very bitter about this turn of events, and you could see as this Taiwan identity and heart issue began to appeal to the population, the polling data began showing the shift. Back in March of last year, the KMT was favored by over 20%, had a 20% margin of leading the DPP by 20%. But they gradually began chipping away, and on the eve of the election, they were only about 8 points ahead. And so some people were predicting that the KMT, Pan Blue, would win by about 3 to 4%. But then we had this bizarre assassination attempt, which resulted in. Here's the referendum data. In addition to voting for president, they had 2 referendum on the ballot. The first referendum was ask a simple question: do you oppose the mainland China's missiles that are aimed at us? And if they won't move their missiles, do you support a strengthening of defense? And the KMT was arguing. It's funny. The KMT was arguing. We don't need these weapons. Once you use them, they're gone anyway, and they could just blow them all up. And I also said, you guys used to really talk tough on defense. You're like the Democrats down in the United States, soft on defense. You guys have gone soft on defense, and the DPP is tough on defense. It was fun to kid around with them. Now, 45.17% of the eligible voters cast a ballot. So the referendum did not pass because, according to the law, 50% of registered voters have to vote in the referendum, and a majority have to vote in favor of it for it to pass. It's a very high hurdle. In other words, out of the 16.5 million registered voters, they've got to turn out 8.25 million voters just to vote in the referendum, and the majority of that 8.25 million have got to favor the referendum. But nevertheless, even though technically the referendum failed, those who cast ballots, 91.8% voted yes to this question. Now, who wouldn't vote? But obviously, 8.2% voted no. The KMT was strongly discouraging people from even voting in it, so it would be defeated just on turnout. Second question: do you support negotiations with the PRC for peace and stability across the Taiwan Straits? In other words, give the government a mandate to enter into some kind of peace negotiations, not for unification, but for some kind of relationship. Only 45.1% cast ballots, and 84.9% voted yes. 7.3 voted no. The discrepancy is the invalid ballots. That's the discrepancy. People stamping both yes and no and things like that. So those are the 2 references. These were hotly debated issues. The KMT argued that they were fake issues. They were not real issues, and I'll show you some data, propaganda on that here in a minute. The referendum law was only passed. the right of referendum has always existed in the Constitution, the 1947 Constitution, referendum and recall, but there's never been a law written to allow it to actually happen, because under a dictatorship, under the KMT dictatorship, they never wrote that into law. But last year, Chen Shui-bian started campaigning to write a referendum law because he wanted to put issues on the ballot, referendum. And the KMT thought, wow, if he gets in front of us on this, he could write a law that would make it very easy for him to pass a referendum on changing the flag, changing the national anthem, changing the name of the country to Taiwan, and really get us in trouble with mainland China and provoke war maybe. So we better take control of this. And they have the 60% of the legislature, the Pan-Blue Party, the KMT. So they actually, in last November, wrote the referendum law. And referendum can occur under three circumstances. Number one, popular demand. Basically signatures. I don't recall what it is. A certain percentage of registered voters have to sign and support a petition, much like a proposition in the United States. Second way to do it is the legislature, by a simple majority vote, put a question to the voters, a referendum before the voters. Or the third condition was, in the case of a national emergency, the president can unilaterally put a referendum on. And they passed it. Thought, we've got Chen Shui-bian tied up. How could he ever have a referendum? He can't. We control the legislature. They can't mobilize the population to get those signatures. And it has to be a national emergency where Taiwan's sovereignty is under threat, before he can call a referendum. Well, the day after they passed the law, he says, fine, I'm calling a referendum for March 20th, the day of the elections. He says, what's the emergency? He says, well, there's 500 missiles aimed at Taiwan threatening to blow us up. That is an emergency by definition. The Chinese are threatening to attack us if we don't reunify. That is an emergency by definition. We're under threat of attack. And the legislature, they came to realize they'd been had. They really were upset about this, that guy is so sly. We never dreamed that he would ever do that. But he did it. And so he wrote these two questions that, Now, the United States, and I'll come to it later, but I'll just highlight, the United States was opposed to the referendum, and so was mainland China, but I'll talk about that detail later. Here's a DPP ballot. This is an example of what the ballot looked like. It's three separate ballots. Of course, they don't have the KMT. The KMT spaces would be there, Lian, John, and this is what the ballot looked like. So up here it says 总统投一阿边. By law, they draw numbers, what the parties are given numbers, and the DPP was assigned number 1, and the KMT, Pan-Blue, PFP was assigned number 2. So immediately began to mobilize different kinds of election stuff going around this. So Abien is Chen Shui-bian's nickname. It's very Taiwanese. His name is Chen Shui-bian, but a very familiar way to call him is Abien. It'd be like in the United States saying vote for Bill rather than vote for Clinton. Vote for Bill, And so it's a very familiar kind of thing. Abien is very Taiwanese. So 总统投一Abien. For president vote number 1 for Abien, for Chen Shui-bian. 强化国防公投改. Vote for the strengthening of national defense. A 0 means voting for and X means voting against. So put your stamp there, the 0. And then the other one is 对两谈判公投改 for the negotiations to normalize relations or to have peace and stability. Put your stamp in the 0. So together they mean 1, 0, 0. So they also started this campaign saying, Taiwan e-buy fund, Taiwan 100%, Taiwan 100, which basically meant vote for Chen Shui-bian and vote yes on both referendum. So they were able to manipulate these things really well, and the Green Party, they would cut off balloons, and they would put little green balloons on their thumb. There was a lot of old ladies at the party headquarters cutting off balloons, party workers. You'd put them on your thumb, and everybody would walk around with a green thumb going, yeah, vote number 1. And then, of course, the Pan-Blue, the KMT, they always were walking around going, vote number 2, vote number 2. So you think, well, it's victory, but it really means vote number 2. Now, that image of vote number 2 is an important image for this next one I'm going to show you. This is a DPP propaganda poster. Now the style of this up top, anybody who's been in mainland China will readily recognize. It's very communist in nature. The red background with the block white letters, and it says "公投失败，中共最爱." It rhymes. If the referendum is defeated, the communists will be the most happy, or they'll really love it. And then you have Jiang Zemin, the former president of the TRC, of course, flashing the which is connecting him to the KMT in his image, saying, you know, he's with the KMT, he supports the KMT, they support him. There's this pro-communist thing going on with the KMT and the CCP. So, 公投失败，中共最爱. And then that's a big poster. At the bottom, I grabbed the bottom of it, and it says, Taiwan needs you. Taiwan needs you to vote for the referendum. In other words, a vote yes on the referendum is a vote for Taiwan. And then up here it says, it doesn't matter whether you're blue or green. It doesn't matter whether you belong to the KMT, PFP, pan green, pan blue, or green, meaning the DPP. They have these colors associated. If you don't vote in the referendum, it's just a victory for the communists. It doesn't matter who you're voting for president. If you don't vote in the national referendum, you're only going to let the communists laugh at us. So they're really appealing to this Taiwan identity issue, this anti-mainland China issue, and associating the pan-blue KMT PFP coalition with having a pro-China policy. You know, they talked about Ping Heping, Joe Taiwan. The pan blue saying, you know, we have to struggle to make peace and we can save Taiwan this way. And the DPP is turning this around saying, no, you're just selling us out to the mainland. You're selling us out. So it's very, very vigorous campaigning. Here's a KMT. This is a pan blue referendum. Now, 我是 Saddam, and then it gets kind of blurry. I can't read it, but up at the top it says a referendum is a valuable asset of is the people's valuable asset of democracy. It's not a cheap tool used as an election tactic. In other words, this is a KMT saying, you know, DPP is just using this as a cheap election tactic, and actually, referendum is a valuable thing for democracy, for the people's democracy. So they're saying that, you know, this is just a cheap trick. And then down here it says you know, when you enter the polling station, vote for number 2. That's the KMT. And then when you walk by the referendum thing, just laugh and it will be okay. And over here it says, 空投 bye-bye. Just, you know, leave a blank ballot and say bye-bye. Bye-bye also means kind of worship. So it means 空投 bye-bye just means, you know, just. So they're trying to dismiss the referendum as a fraud and an election gimmick and just saying, you know, vote for president and then just walk out. So there won't be enough a 50% turnout on the referendum. And they do it with kind of some humor, but they associate Saddam Hussein with, you know, I guess, it is him. It's a picture of him, you know. But this became complicated. I'll mention this in just a minute because this image of Saddam Hussein and other kind of funny images were used by the KMT, and I'll tell you what. I talked to some people about that, but there's a sense that I guess, you know, Saddam Hussein here, you know, Saddam Hussein, Iraq was never a democracy under Saddam Hussein. He always had some trick, some dirty trick going on, and so they're associating Chen Shui-bian and the DPP with Saddam Hussein and some kind of trickery and stuff, and saying that he's just squandering this valuable democratic commodity of a referendum, and he's using it as a cheap election trick. Now, let me go back here a second. Now, the elections were held on March 20th. Within 3 hours, we know what the results are. They come rolling in. But the day before the election, 1:45 in the afternoon, the day before the election, we're sitting in KMT headquarters, and they're haranguing us about how corrupt the DPP is, how bad their policies are, how the economy is going down the tubes, how they're picking an unnecessary fight with mainland China, and how Taiwan's future, economic future and vitality is linked to China, and when we've got to patch up relations with China. And a note is passed in. The guy reads it and gets this shocked look on his face and looks up and says that someone has just attempted to assassinate the president. He's on his way to the hospital. And like this kind of a... And then he just goes back to his harangue of the DPP. And I was sitting there thinking, in the United States, the country would simply shut down if there was an attempted assassination on the president. And we left that, we left KMT headquarters, and we went over to the Government Information Office. This is the ministry level sort of information ministry there. And we had an appointment with the Minister of Information, this woman. We walked in. She says, oh, come in. I'll have to apologize. There's this terrible thing. The president has been assassinated. I've got to finish writing or editing this government press release about it. So she did some editing and gave it to her assistant, and she took it out. And then she says, well, okay, now we can go ahead. What did you want to talk about? I go, well, we want to talk about the assassination attempt. She goes, well, what do you know? She says, well, there's apparently we've recovered 2 bullets. They found one in the clothing of Chen Shui-bian, and they found another one on the floor of the Jeep. It's a light wound to the vice president's knee and just a graze on the president's stomach, and they're at the hospital, and everything's going to be okay. And then we just went forward and talked about different issues. I was sort of struck by how it wasn't such a crisis. Well, immediately the KMT began broadcasting advertisements where they would, or not advertisements, but where they would interview Lian Zhan and James Song, and they say, well, this is a tragedy. We really hope the president is okay. We wish him the best. This is a challenge to Taiwan democracy. We all need to unite, keep our eyes on the issues, not let this distract us, and go forward with the elections. This is an attempt to undermine democracy. But then polling data starts coming in throughout the afternoon. It's illegal in Taiwan to publish polling data for 10 days before the elections, but both parties and a lot of private groups are doing polling. They just can't publicly release them. They would sort of hint to us some of the stuff that was going on. They said, we think we're ahead by 3 or something. But the KMT sees the polling data. Remember the day before, the margin had been narrowed to 8%, and given margin of error 3 or 4%, that's pretty close. But they begin to see the polling data slipping, so there's obviously some kind of sympathy vote going on here. People are shocked by the assassination attempt. Now, we don't have the data on this now, but the assumption is that it did not change people's votes. It didn't make pan-blue people vote pan-green, but it mobilized the base of the pan-blue, so people said, man, they've challenged our democracy. They've tried to shoot our president. We're going to for sure go and vote. That's the best way to stand up against this kind of intimidation. And there were stories of 5 hours to get back home so they could vote. So they did turn more people out. And in that sense, it was a sympathy vote. It may have turned the election. But as the KMT saw this polling numbers shifting in Chen Shui-bian's favor, they began to, then that night and early the next morning, they began, in their interviews, saying, well, there's something fishy going on here. They changed from this national unity and go forward to there's something fishy going on here. Why were the president and the vice president in the same car together, in the same Jeep together? Why weren't they wearing bulletproof vests? Why wasn't there bulletproof glass on this Jeep? What's going on? And they didn't directly say it, but it was very clear that they were saying, this is a hoax. This is a setup. And they told us, as we expected some kind of dramatic event the day before the elections. And we went through and we gamed it out. They were very reluctant to talk about this, but we really pushed them on it. We thought maybe Li Denghui, who was campaigning for the DPP, would collapse on stage. He's the guy that brought democracy to Taiwan in a way. Maybe he would collapse on stage. It would be dramatic. Or maybe Chen Shui-bian's wife is in a wheelchair because she was run down by a car in a previous attempt to kill her, actually. Probably, we assume by the KMT or some KMT supporters, and she's a paraplegic. And maybe they could wheel her up on stage, and she could struggle to stand up out of her wheelchair, and it would just, and they thought they would do something dramatic. So we never imagined he would concoct this suicide thing. So it was clear that they were hinting that this is fake, and it changed the vote. And so by the end of the day, we watched them vote, we watched them count, and it's only a 0.2% margin of victory. And so immediately, that night, I went from the Central Elections Campaign headquarters to a DPP, to a KMT rally where Lian Zhan and Sung Shu would normally give a concession speech and say, you know, good fight, we both did hard, you know, now it's all over with, let's come together. It's important that we all come together and support the country, much like we would do in the United States, except maybe in 2000 with Florida. But usually that's the way we concede, you know, okay, congratulate the victor and pledge support. Man, these people were angry. They were fanning the flames. They were out there. I mean, Lian Zhan and Sung Shu never looked so alive in their life because they're generally kind of Al Gore-ish. These people were just haranguing the crowd. You know, this is a cheat. We've been cheated. This is an embarrassment. The world's watching. They're laughing at us. We're a laughingstock. This is a rigged election. This is a fake assassination. And then they started holding up these big banners calling for people to hit the streets and demonstrate. Go down in front of the presidential palace and demonstrate. And this went on all night long. It was deafening, the noise. They had these air horns and things. And we left there and went over to the DPP rally, and Chen Shui-bian came out, and some people said, God, for the first time in his life, it was like presidential. It was sort of this soft music, kind of kumbaya feeling. They had big signs, don't blow air horns and stuff like that. There was no loud music. And he gave this, he congratulated his opposition on a good fight. He talked about we need to come together now. We need to negotiate with mainland China and bring peace. We need to work to make the economy better. And gave this nice presidential speech. And so the difference between the feeling in those two crowds was very different. Now, let me say one other thing, and then kind of wrap this up. In the days leading up to the election, it was clear that the DPP thought they were losing. They would never say we would lose, but we met with a group of DPP think tank kind of people. One of them being the vice foreign minister, actually. And we sat and counted how many times these people said, not when we lose the election, but if we lose the election, we are a good opposition party. We have been in opposition for many years. We know how to be in opposition. If we don't win, we will do this. And we started thinking, why don't they just say when? Because it sounds like they've already given up. Because they knew what the polling data was. But then the assassination attempt and things occurred. So the KMT is kind of a very angry party in opposition. Very angry, very disappointed, very disheartened. But the anger was palpable. So they started this immediate campaign for a recount. That's what this means. Yan Piao. This was a flyer that I picked up down on the presidential square there, where they were pasting these up on walls. The one thing that's interesting is, you know, now in Taiwan, protest is interesting because with computers and laser printers and things, in moments' notice they can laser print lots of flyers and things. And so these were large laser printed things, and they would simply get them wet with water, and then they would stick them on the brick walls and stick them on cars. And I went over and peeled some off and rolled them up, and they were all wet. But I took them back to my hotel room and laid them out on the floor and dried them out so I could save them. So this was common. Yan Piao, and they would chant Yan Piao, Yan Piao, recount, recount, recount. And Lian Zhan would get up there and motivate them and whip them along, you know. And then James Song would get up and do it, and then someone else would get up and do it, and they would blow their horns and everything. And so they demanded a recount. And these kind of posters began to emerge. This is Chen Shui-bian with the Hitler mustache and the swastika. It says, Shitala, Hitler, Bian Shatai. Step down, Chen Shui-bian. Over here says, he's a bastard. You know, these are graffiti on top of graffiti. And a lady I was talking to at this KMT demonstration, she says, you know, I would never say this in among nice company, but he's a bastard. And she said, and Li Denghui, he's probably Japanese. He's a real bastard. And she was an angry person. But there was big posters saying, you know, Li Denghui, who was the KMT leader and candidate and president, they say he's the father of all corruption. And one of the alarming posters, I guess, most inflammatory, was a big poster that said, Bu Yan Piao Zhou Geming. If they don't recount, we will have a revolution. And the police were all lined up, and you know, and I asked people, "Are you afraid of the police coming after you and beating you up?" And they said, "No, we're not afraid. It's, you know, we're friends." And they actually let me get behind the barrier, and I went and talked to some policemen and things. But people didn't seem concerned about the police. The rally became illegal after 10 o'clock at night. Their emergency permit to demonstrate was expired, and they just said, "We're not leaving the square." And they stayed on. They started pitching tents. People started bringing food to sell. They moved in some portable sanitary facilities, and it went on for basically a week, and now it's cooled down. So there's this interesting anti-Chun flyer. And then related to the assassination attempt, this is a good one. Bien, xian yi yan du pi. Bien, President Chun, open your clothes. We want to examine your stomach, where he was apparently hit by the bullet. And this harangue had some effect, because the day after, or 2 days after, Chen Shui-bian, the president's office, actually allowed the press to post a series of photographs that were taken while he was in the hospital being sewn up. And I mean, it's the president of the country on the operating table with his clothes pulled open, showing the doctor sewing this wound up. It was a 6-7 inch wound, sewing it up, and different kinds of close-up kind of technical medical kinds of photographs that I guess are routinely taken. They actually published these. And I was thinking, man, would the Americans ever get this out of when Ronald Reagan or JFK was shot? Would we ever have these grotesque pictures? But they did it in order to try to prove that this wasn't a hoax. Now, U.S.-China-Taiwan dilemma. These are ideas that I have to sort of develop as I go. The U.S. President Bush came out against the referendum. They saw it as too provocative toward mainland China. Mainland China was very angry about it, and so President Bush sent over an emissary to talk to Chen Shui-bian and said, we're opposed to the referendum. And then on December 9th, I think it was December 9th or 18th, in the White House, in the Oval Office, with Wen Jiabao, the Prime Minister of the PRC there, he actually publicly said, we oppose any unilateral moves to change the status quo, which was a message to Taiwan that you do not declare independence, you do not fool around with referendum, you don't do anything to provoke the Chinese to change the status quo, and equally telling the Chinese don't unilaterally attack, we want a peaceful thing. So the United States administration came out against the referendum, but in the Congress actually there was a joint resolution being prepared to support the referendum as a human right and a civil liberty that any democratic country should exercise, that the people can through direct democracy. So the administration was split from the Congress on this, but clearly the administration was thinking in a long-term issue with how does this affect our relations with China, how does this affect the triangular relations between China, Taiwan, and the United States, and we don't want instability in the region, and we don't want to have to go to war or anything, so that's why the administration took this position. But in Taiwan it came across as the U.S. administration being anti-democracy. And they would say things like, it's none of their business, they should stay out of our politics. Same kind of stuff you hear from mainland China. PRC was opposed because they support the One China principle, and they oppose any move towards Taiwan independence. They see the referendum as setting a precedent for a referendum on independence, or other kinds of referendum that would further Taiwan down the road towards eventual complete and formal independence. And Taiwan's really at a crossroads. It's a divide. They have a divided national identity. Increasingly, it's a Taiwanese identity, but people have ambiguous. But a large number of people, about 50% of those people, have an ambiguous feeling of being both Chinese and Taiwanese. And politics have become very acrimonious. I mean, with a razor-thin majority for Chen Shui-bian, the KMT just couldn't believe that they lost that election. And the anger by the KMT toward Chen Shui-bian, I think, was even more acrimonious than the anger of the Democrats toward the Republicans after the Florida debacle and the selection of the president by the Supreme Court. So Taiwan politics remains very divided, and it may be difficult for them to go forward. The legislature is dominated by the KMT. They have 60% of the seats, but there is an election in December for new legislators, and maybe Chen Shui-bian might be able to mobilize people, and they might be able to increase their seats in the legislature and be able to do things. But to now, it's been a divided government that has had some real problems. So the KMT's accusation of government incompetence is partly their delaying and blocking tactics. But also, Chen Shui-bian and this group has never been in government before, so they're kind of new at this game. So that's where it is. So I'll just leave it there. And there's a few minutes left, I guess, if you want to ask some questions or something. Some of you already had to go to class. Ray, any question? I mean, you lived there under martial law. You'd be surprised how different it is. Democracy in Taiwan is very fascinating. I would say to any of you students, if you want to study sort of young democratic countries working out their democracy and their destiny, Taiwan is a great place to do this. very, very open press. There's only 230 legislators in the Taiwan National Assembly, but on any given day, they said there were 220 reporters there watching them, and 7 major stations, and so they said, they're looking for scandal all the time. It's very, very free press, very, very strong human rights movement. It's just funny and comical sometimes to see the KMT on the other side of the barricades now. In 1979, it wasn't very long ago, when the DPP was just getting organized and the opposition was demanding democracy, the KMT shot them down. In Kaohsiung, there was the Kaohsiung incident. They shot these people dead. And they would break into their homes and assassinate them and stuff like that. So the police were very well behaved. There was no violence, no force was really used to get people off the square. Eventually, the KMT said, we need to go home and rest. We need to look after our health. And so they got people to leave the square. Sure.
I know after the elections, Beijing was kind of putting out comments to the effect of, we won't let Taiwan, our Chinese brothers, fall into chaos.
Yeah.
And riots and stuff were happening. What was the general Taiwanese attitude towards Beijing's comments?
Basically to ignore it. I think the majority of people would ignore it. This is, China has yet to learn that trying to manipulate Taiwan politics has always been not good for them. They tried to defeat Li Denghui. They only increased his majority when he ran in '96. They tried to defeat Chen Shui-bian. They only increased his majority in 2000. They were very quiet about this time, but now they started talking about, well, it's chaotic and everything like that. And Taiwanese people said, it's not chaotic. Here we're protesting. It's peaceful protest. There's no violence, And they actually sort of forget Beijing, They're not going to attack us. But then I think other people thought, we don't want this to get out of hand. We're concerned that the stock market is being hurt by this, that it might shake the business environment. And it was kind of the rational kinds of issues and the fatigue of demonstrating that eventually brought an end to it. And the President Chen Shui-bian and Lian Zhang got together and they said, okay, look, there's no law on recount. The courts don't know what to do. So let's just agree that there will be a recount. So they simply said, okay, there will be a recount. And now they're haggling over the details of the recount. But Chen Shui-bian says, I'll take the result of a recount. And, with a razor-thin 2.2% majority, you could lose, given the number of invalid ballots and things like that.
If there is a war between Taiwan and China, what is America's position?
That's a very difficult question because America's position is actually ambiguous, which is by design. There's a debate over whether or not we should be ambiguous or less ambiguous. We are obligated by law. The United States is obligated by law, the Taiwan Relations Act, to sell arms to Taiwan and to defend Taiwan if it's attacked. We're obligated by law. Now, if Taiwan provoked the attack, I don't know if that obligation would be valid. If China unilaterally attacked Taiwan, there would be definitely people argue that we have a legal responsibility to help defend Taiwan, even though we do not recognize it as a country. Remember in 1996 when China started testing missiles across the Taiwan Straits, lobbing missiles towards Kaohsiung and Taipei. President Clinton sent two aircraft carrier task force to the region and sent a clear message to Beijing that, don't use military intimidation to try to force Taiwan to enter into negotiations for unification. So the United States has tipped its hand by sending 2 aircraft carrier task force. Now, given President Bush's inclination to move unilaterally even, I think probably the odds are the United States would intervene. But on the other hand, public opinion in the United States, the polls that I've seen, do not support sending U.S. military to defend Taiwan. The population does not want to send troops to defend Taiwan, even though it is a democracy. And given the unfortunate experience we're now having in Iraq, Americans just don't want to get involved in a bloody battle between mainland China and Taiwan, where we would lose either way. I mean, our U.S. interests are in maintaining peace and stability in the region, whether it's the current status quo or whether it's some kind of negotiated reunification or negotiated independence for Taiwan. America's interests are a peaceful settlement because we have economic interests in both places, and we have emotional interests in Taiwan as a democracy. And the United States, the dilemma here for the United States, I think, is that it would be very difficult for us to stand by and watch a democracy taken over by a communist nation. despite the fact that we recognize the PRC as the legitimate government of all of China. And we did recognize that there was only one China. And the Chinese on both sides of the Taiwan Straits agree that there is only one China. Now, the DPP's line on that is that that ain't so anymore. The Chinese, KMT, agreed that there was only one China, but the majority of us are Taiwanese, and we reject that idea, and we were never asked that question. So to say that the one China policy, the United States is hooked into a one China policy because Chinese on both sides of the Taiwan Straits agree that there's one China is no longer legitimate, because the majority of Taiwanese think that Taiwan is separate from mainland China, and only a very small minority want reunification. That's the way they explain that issue, which is, by the way, included in the communiques on normalization in the Shanghai communique that the United States signs. Yes?
What, if any, comparisons can be made between the situation of impeachment in Korea and this referendum?
Very different. I mean, I don't know all the details of the impeachment in Korea. That president was elected on a very different kind of platform, and I don't know what the laws I don't know what the law pertains to. Maybe, Danny, you could say something about that. I don't know if this was totally legal or what. But, this was a very free and fair election. I'm confident that it was a free and fair election, and accusations that it was somehow rigged are KMT grumbling and sore losers. I watched people vote for several hours and watched how it was run. I watched ballots counted for several hours and how they were counted, and then went to the Central Election Commission and saw the returns come in from around the country. And I'm confident that, yes, anybody that studies voting behavior knows that votes are only an approximate estimation of who people favor, because there's always, given the number of votes, there's always a problem with some mistakes in counting or something like that. But there was no ballot box stuffing. There was no purchasing of votes and things like that in any significant way that was evident. So the KMT has argued that there's problems with the voting, but have never come forward with any specific instances of ballot box stuffing or vote buying or some kind of illegal activity. Yeah, Ben?
I know the Beijing government also, either coincidentally or not, just a few days after the election, in talking about Hong Kong's basic law, said they were going to reinterpret what democracy under that means according to their, and given the situation last August with the protests and everything, how did Hong Kong play into the election?
I don't think Hong Kong played into the election. It may have heightened Taiwanese feelings about their opposition to reunification, saying, or the one country, two systems, saying, look what's happening in Hong Kong. The Chinese are now violating the basic law. They're trying to delay democracy. They're dismissing any democratic protesters as Chinese traitors and things like that. I had a meeting with the vice chairman of the Mainland Affairs Committee in Taiwan, the person who's in charge of mainland affairs, and we asked him about this question, and he says, look, the Chinese, it was kind of like, trust the Chinese to do something incompetent like this. I mean, while the Taiwanese are in this election, a hard-fought, close election, the Chinese are really blowing it in Hong Kong. They have tried, they've said, look, in order to be in government, you have to demonstrate your patriotism. Patriotism litmus test is you have to savor the one China policy. And they've said, democracy, they said, they've argued about not going forward with their promise to bring full democracy by 2007. So they've really been blowing it in Hong Kong, proposing a national security law, which, I mean, to mobilize 500,000 Hong Kong people to demonstrate is an amazing feat, because they usually don't get off their feet for anything except for making some money or something. I mean, sorry for Hong Kong people, they're not politically active. Now remember that Hong Kong is only 7 million people, and to get 500,000 people to swarm, central area and demand that this law not be put on the books, and for the Hong Kong authorities to have to back down, and then for Beijing to backpedal, and now to talk down democracy and try to undermine some of the very popular advocates of democracy is bad timing and bad politics, given the environment that we're in. And Taiwan people just reaffirmed in their minds the anti-democratic nature of the PRC, and and further confirmed in their minds that the one country, two systems policy is just, that's not going to get anywhere in Taiwan. We're a democracy. Why would we trade that? Why would we trade what we have now for something less that Hong Kong's got? China's got to offer us something a lot more. They're offering us less than what we've got now. So why would we ever support that? Is kind of the attitude. Well, big dilemma for everybody. Thank you very much.